Okay, time for a little botany. A seed has everything in it to grow a whole new plant. And when you first see your plant sprouting, you will see the leaves, and that's what they call the cotyledons. There are two different types. You'll see a dicotyledon and a monocotyledon. You will also probably not see the little main root, which is called a radicle. The true leaves, or the adult leaves, are the ones that you'll see later on as the plant matures. Okay, so when you're watering your seedlings, you're going to want to make sure that they're kept moist and not soggy. Basically, if you took a sponge and went to wring the water out, you have a moist sponge but it's not drippy wet, that's kind of what you're going for with this soil mixture. Something that a lot of people really don't understand importance-wise is light. And if you don't have bright natural light, your seedlings and your plants will not do well, and eventually they will die. There are very few herbs that you can grow that will tolerate shade. And so you'll probably need to figure out some kind of supplemental lighting if you don't have a good, bright, natural south-facing window. Without the light, seedlings become real leggy and spindly, and the internodes, which is the long area between the leaves, gets longer and longer. All plants need light to manufacture the food for themselves. That's what we call photosynthesis. The chlorophyll, the green stuff in the leaves, absorbs the light, and through a process of magical chemical changes, the plant produces food for itself. And when sun-loving plants like herbs don't receive enough light, they just can't feed themselves. And the leaves get smaller and smaller, and the stems and the internodes grow longer and longer as the plant looks for light. It's normal, and actually it's really efficient for producing food that way because the plant isn't having to produce as much food. But it doesn't make for good, big, healthy plants. Sometimes when you've got your seedlings going, lighting's correct, everything looks good, they've sprouted, they look great, all of a sudden you look at them and an hour later or the next day, they've just sort of fallen over. They just are laying there and they look dead. And if you look really closely, you might see at the base of the stem, they look kind of shriveled. Sometimes they look pinched, like something actually just pinched them, and so they can't get any fluids up to the top. They might look wet and soggy as well. Okay, so now we've got our seedlings. They're looking good. They've developed a couple of sets of adult leaves. They're looking big and they're healthy, and it's time that we start thinking about transplanting them into a bigger pot or possibly outdoors. It's called pricking out your seedlings. It's easy to do, and it's rare that you commit murder and kill off seedlings when you do this. The first thing you want to do is to have your new pot and soil mix all ready to go. We're going to prick out a few little rosemary seedlings here, and you see I've just got a couple left in here, and you just simply take your pencil or a little stick or something, and you can kind of lift underneath and get all the roots and grab those, and see it's actually got quite a few little roots here. And then we will take this and pop this into our prepared pot. Remember, we've got our potting mix and it's already dampened. And then we will take a little bit more and firm this in. I've got this completely crooked. And we'll give it a little drink and make sure it's standing up straight. And I would keep it probably out of direct sunlight for a day or so, just to make sure its little roots are setting well in the new digs. And that's it. Now, once we've got our little seedlings pricked out, transplanted, or moved into new pots, if you're planning on putting them outside or planting them out into the garden, you're going to need to do something called hardening off your plants. And what this does is it takes plants that have been nurtured and coddled and kept warm and, all of the things that we want to do, and you get them used to being outdoors in the environment where they're going to be growing. And It's not difficult. You just need to find a protected place to set your herbs, which means not full sunlight if they're not used to that. If you have a very windy area like I do, I need to find some place that's protected from the wind and has shade during the hottest part of the day or the warmest part of the day. And so they're not completely blown around, because seedlings will dry out real quick, and they can sunburn, actually. So I usually set mine out for a week or so and let them kind of get hardened off. If cold weather threatens or there's bad weather, I bring them back in. And during this time, you kind of get them exposed to, the brighter sunshine and the conditions that they'll actually be growing in. Do pay attention if you notice that they look a little bit crispy on the edges, or if they're drying out too much, or they look wilted. They might need a little more protection for a little bit longer period of time. And once they're looking happy and healthy, you can either set them out in the garden, or you can plant them in their full-time pots. Now, just like baby anythings, seedlings actually can get hungry. So if you've transplanted your young herbs into the garden, they should be okay if your soil's good. And if they're in pots, you will need to remember that unless you've used a potting mix that has some fertilizer built into it, you may need to feed them periodically. If you give herbs too much fertilizer, you will discover that they kind of lose their flavor. They're not quite as tasty as they would be normally. Plants that are a little bit stressed actually produce more of the essential oils that give us those great flavors that we like. So you'll need to fertilize them a little bit. Those represent nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And potassium is known by the letter K, so don't let that confuse you. Those numbers are the percentage of the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in the bag. Generally with herbs, I usually try to just use compost or an organic fertilizer. I try not to use too much, except, those potted plants really need it, because they're unable to take anything other than what's in that pot up, and they really don't get the nutrients that they need. So periodically, make sure that you do feed your herbs a little bit. If you've got a lot of rainfall, it's flushed out faster, so you might need to do what they call side dressing, which is where you just take a little bit of compost or something and lay that really directly alongside the herb, or dig it in just a little bit around the roots. And that should keep them nice and happy.